We're going to look at assignment 2. So in assignment 2, you are going to start by creating hold on. In assignment 2, you're going to make 2 images. One is a black and white 5-step gradient geometric print, and one is a 5-step black and white organic print. These images will be based off of famous artworks of your choosing. So you will also need to research and find artists that you like that have works that will work for this assignment. So I will show you examples and some step-by-step instructions. So you're going to start off by making a 5-step gradient. Step 1 of the gradient should be pure white, and step 5 should be pure black. You should then have 2, 3, and 4, which are evenly spaced between 1 and 5, so that they have a nice range of contrast. As you see, a fluid gradient blends one to the next, and there's really no distinguishing marks. But there is a nice transitional step between each of these. You should turn in your 5-step gradient first and make sure that your spacing is correct before starting on your prints. So get that done as soon as possible. So here is the one method, step-by-step instructions on how you can create your image. So this print is by White. She does a lot of botanicals and dramatic lit close-ups. So this plant has this really nice lighting. It has good contrast, which means it has a full range of white through black. That will lend itself well. If your print is very flat or has a very limited range, so maybe it mostly is in this area in tones, that's going to be harder to do. So do look for something that has all the tones so that when you break it up, you have sections of each tonal value. So I use some tracing paper. You can use tissue paper. You can just print out your image offline. You're going to want to print a full printer sheet, so an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So print as large as you can so that your final print will be as big as you can. You can also just tape that copy paper to the window and put your Bristol board over it and trace that way. It's just, you're going to need a really bright day. So I've also had students that just draw based off of this image onto their Bristol board. So whatever works for you. Here I'm using tissue paper. I've traced the tissue paper by laying it over. Again, you can use a light table if you have it, or the window, or just have it, just use the kitchen table. Here's what it looks like once it's done. I've already actually transferred with this piece, so some of the lines are a little darker. And then I transferred it onto my canvas paper. Now you want to use the canvas paper for this assignment because it's primed for your inks, or for your paints, sorry. And then I've used some of my guidelines plus the original image as sources of where I'm going to put my different tones. So as you can see in the original image here, you have a gradation from pretty white to black. I've split that up into sections. This is my geometric, so my shapes are fairly straight edged, creating geometric type shapes. And of course the original plant has that geometric shape to it. You will notice that the source image, as the photographer made it, and the painting is backwards. That's because after you trace it, you flip the tracing paper and you can rub the tracing paper to get the pencil lines onto your canvas paper. So when you're working, what can help is if you have your image on your phone or you print it out, is when you can actually flip it horizontally so that it matches your final. So when you're using it for reference, you're not having to think backwards as well. So here's another geometric. This is by Franz Marc. He's a German expressionist, does a lot of kind of like cubed up sort of shapes. So I thought that lent well to a geometric print. So again, tissue paper, traced it. There's my final tissue paper. Then I flipped that onto my canvas and transferred and painted. Now in this one's case, I printed out the color version, but I also printed it out in black and white. Since we're going from black and white to black and white, it makes it a little easier to figure out what tones should go where. You are going to be using your own judgment. That's part of this project, is that you're taking a master art piece and transitioning it into an abstract piece. Now, when these are next to each other, you can see some of the similarities, but if you view this on its own, you don't necessarily immediately jump to the Two Foxes by Franz Marc. So this gives you kind of an idea. The next option is to take your master image, and this is Pepper 32 by Edward Weston, and then take it into Photoshop or some other photo editing program and posterize that image into a 5-step gradient. So here's the posterized image, 5-step gradient, and then using that as a reference to paint your final piece. Now, hold on. I don't know how to escape when I'm recording. There we go. Okay. So if you have Photoshop or another photo editing program, other photo editing programs might be a little different, but I can show you in Photoshop. So here's, Pepper 30. So Edward Weston's Pepper, we're going to start by going to image or mode, and we're going to turn it into a grayscale because we are going to keep it all gray toned. If this was a color image, it would convert it to a gray toned image. If your image is, like I said before, flat, you can go to the curve function and you can add more contrast to it by pulling down your whites and moving up. A lot of presets, you could just do strong contrast. Now, and you can see it puts in that curve for you. This one doesn't really need that because Edward Weston's photography already has a nice tonal range. Edward Weston, Ansel Adams, Imogen Cunningham, Minor White, all of those people will have really nice tonal ranges in their photography just because of the style that they worked in. Now, after you have your image black and white and you've turned it to a grayscale, and if you've added if you did add a curve layer, you're then going to want to flatten the image so it's only that one layer. Then go to Image, Adjustment, Posterize, and then we want a 5-step gradient, and you can push OK. And you can see that it has broken the image into tones. Now it's looking at every pixel individually. We are obviously not going to paint that detailed. So what you can do is just make a educated shape based on where those lines are versus being uber exact. And you can see that in my pepper that I painted here. So that similar line is in there as well. I've just made an educated estimation of where I want the different paints to be based on this image here. Okay, so then we'll look at some student examples. So these are 5 examples of organic shapes. So the difference between geometric and organic, here this one's organic. You can see the shapes curve and flow and move with the form. The lines are not rigid and straight trapezoidal like they are in these first 2 that are geometric. So here are some organic shapes. This is a Weston cabbage leaf. I think this is a Weston shell. These are Imogen Cunningham flowers. This is a Salvador Dali. What you want to make sure you do is that you have a good distinguished 5-step gradient. So here we can see white, our step 2, 3, 4, and then black. Here again, white, 1, 2, 3, and black. These are a little close together, but they're still distinguishable. Up in this top one, it's a little harder, I think just because we don't have a really good white. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and black. So there are all colors represented. Here are some examples of geometric. Things that work really well for geometric are things that have really nice straight lines in them. This is a Man Ray rayograph. So the student broke it into tones. She had to add quite a bit of contrast to this image because the original is mostly gray toned. Buildings work really well. Cubist work, like Picasso and some other Impressionist, Cubist, and German Expressionist work all work really well. This is a take on New Descending a Staircase with a face superimposed. So it's a modern take on a Cubist piece. And you can see all those nice straight lines. A curve or a circle is considered part of a geometric shape, but you can see that it's nice and smooth, well executed. This student chose to do a portrait, which portraits can be really fun to do geometric because it really creates unique shapes on the face. And here is another, this is a man overlooking the sea, and it is a Impressionist piece, which actually is pretty flat toned, very much in the middle grays. So the student had to create quite a bit of contrast here, but did an excellent job. When turning in your assignment, you are going to want to turn in a copy of the original picture as well as your finished work of that picture. I will obviously take into account that most of them are going to probably be flipped horizontally if you use the tissue paper transfer method, but I do want to see what your original image was in that. Also, email me and check with me if you have questions, if your images will work. Again, you're going to make one with geometric shapes, so like this, and one with organic shapes, like this. The subject matter can be anything you want, just obviously organic things like flowers and shells and plants do tend to work better for organic than buildings. Buildings tend to work better for geometric, but anything can work for either. As you can see in my first example, this is a plant. I'm using it for geometric. This one is cubist. It obviously would be very hard to do an organic with this piece because it has so many harsh lines. And this would be doable in cubic, but it would look very different, which actually could be an interesting way of interpreting it. So I hope that gives you some ideas. You're going to want to, step 1, make your 5-step gradient, turn that in. Step 2, find your images that you want to convert from master artist to your project. Put those on the discussion board so that we can make sure and get okayed from me before you proceed to painting them. All right, well, I'm excited to see what you guys do. Remember to watch your paint video on mixing the tones. You're gonna always wanna mix dark into light, and use more paint is fine. Just don't apply your paint too thin, or you'll get these little white specks here. This one, you see the paint's kind of thin, so it's skipping on the paper. A nice thicker coat of paint will create a nice solid color. All right, talk to you soon.